Welcome, everyone. We're going to start the beginning of a series on the major arcana. And this one's obviously going to start at the beginning, which is the Fool, at least in the BOTA version deck. Interestingly enough, not all decks begin with the Fool, right? There are older decks where the Fool is placed later in the series. But in this one, it is. So the series is based on several Paul Foster Case writings, Tarot Fundamentals and 32 Paths of Wisdom. Please note there's an FLO version of Tarot Fundamentals, but if you took the BOTA version, you'll find it right at home. And obviously, we've got some material on the tarot summarized in the Threshold lessons as well. So if you're working through that series, again, a lot of this material is going to be familiar. All right, so take a moment to look at the Fool key here, and then we'll talk about it. In case you're wondering at the design here, those of you who've colored your own tarot keys and done the little yellow border around this key, the borders in the BOTA coloring instructions use what's called the king scale. So as it happens, there are 4 color scales for each one of the paths, the 22 paths for which the tarot trumps are mapped onto the Tree of Life. And so what I've done here is I've created a little pattern where we start with the king scale and then go to the queen and the knights and then the princess scales. The idea is to start with the archetype of the key and then sort of bring it into manifestation. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the Fool key. The image here is a reference to an old story. The image is of Parzival beginning his quest. And the concept of the key, it represents spirit or air. We're going to talk a little more about that. It also represents the higher self or superconsciousness, that part of it which is eternal, the soul journeying forth into manifestation, so to speak. So it also corresponds, I believe, although I haven't seen anything written down on this, to the grade of neophyte on the path of return as you work through the traditional Rosicrucian grades. So one of the topics that we're going to cover as we go through the various keys is something called the tarot tableau. Paul Case is very fond of representing the tarot trumps in this fashion. And so the Fool is kind of outside and in between everything else here. It's kind of in a category of its own. And so sometimes when I present the tableau, I'll put the Fool right up there on top. So when we look at the tableau, generally Case breaks it into 7 stages of spiritual unfoldment, with the principle being on the top, and then the middle key being the law or agency, and then the bottom one, the condition or effect, or the stage of spiritual evolution. But the Fool, again, it's beyond all this. It is, in a sense, it's the inner us, maybe not the personality us, but the inner soul part of us. And so part of the archetype here is this idea of taking the leap of faith, going from being in the spirit world, coming into manifestation in order to grow, to develop. That's kind of what souls do. So it's a journey through darkness, but again, we see the image here of the Fool looking to higher peaks in the distance. He's gaining something for his endeavors. So Case says this key is connected with the life power, the one force, the limitless light, and we see that sometimes abbreviated LVX. Also with the primal will. The number on this key is 0. Again, that's the Fool is not always numbered 0 in all decks. It's sometimes placed elsewhere, but in Case's formulation, it's numbered 0. So as 0, it's no thing. It's not any one thing, but because 0 has the potential to be anything, it suggests sort of beyond manifestation. It is, again, sometimes positioned before and between and after all cards, the outside and within manifestation. And again, the in terms of how we relate to it in manifestation, it is sometimes tied to the ideas of spirit and air. So the Hebrew letter on this key is Aleph. Aleph means ox when it's spelled out as a word. And the idea of ox is a sort of a motive power. The ox is what pulls the cart or the plow. Case says it's also associated with cultural power, the idea of sort of a mass mind or mass set of expectations impelling people into action. And also the taming of natural forces. The letters of the word Aleph sum to 111. So one of the things we can do when we're looking at things Kabbalistically is we can peek at the gematria for certain numbers, and sometimes that'll give us a clue to the hidden nature of a particular archetype. So as it happens, there's a number of interesting words that sum to 111. Nachiel, the intelligence of the sun, suggesting a link to that key. Achad Hua Elohim, he is one God, suggesting a unity theme. The word for ruin, destruction, sudden death. When we get into Uranus, astrologically, sudden change, sudden illumination, but also sometimes sudden ruin as things are blown away by revelation, are tied into this key. The Hebrew word for mad, again, tied into the fool denomination on the key. Also, AUM, the Hebrew version of the Eastern Om. And it is also the number of Yod Yehovah Adonai, the hand of our Lord God, roughly translated. Astrologically, it's associated with air, but also with the outer planet Uranus. It is said to be the higher octave of Mercury. It is co-ruler of Aquarius with planet Saturn, the modern rulers, according to some astrologers, of Aquarius. And it is said to find its exaltation or highest expression in the Scorpio key. So Aquarius being the star key, Scorpio being the death key. So in terms of its exaltation in the death key, and the idea is when the physical body dies, actual death as opposed to initiatic death, the spirit is set free and it can then return, the personality returns and rejoins the higher self. That light at the end of the tunnel, we learn, is an extended part of ourselves, and things are sort of reunited. So in initiatic death, the idea is to see if you can sort of trip that mechanism and then pull the spirit back with knowledge of the eternal to the physical personality. Okay, let's talk a little bit about air. So the fool, the word, comes from the Latin phallus. It means a bag of wind or a bellows. The bellows is, I don't know if you've seen the old images where you basically you have this item by the fire where you open and close it, and as you close it, it pushes air into the fire and intensifies the heat. And if you get the fire hot enough, you can do fun things like melt metals and then recast them into other forms. So the bag of wind association is kind of interesting. There's a reference to Aeolus in the Odyssey. The Odyssey is, of course, the ancient Greek tale. And Aeolus was the Greek god of air. And in the tale of the Odyssey, he gifts a bag of wind to our hero, Odysseus. So that's kind of what that looks like. So that the point in the story where that happens, Odysseus had been off to Troy. Odysseus was the one who came up with the idea of the Trojan horse, and yet he didn't give the gods credit for the idea, and so he goes on this wandering journey through the Mediterranean as he can never quite get home. It's sort of the Gilligan's Island version of the ancient world. He's almost there. He happens upon Aeolus on an island, and Aeolus, as the god of air, does something special for him. He says, I will bag up in this bag of wind all the other winds except the gentle west wind that will blow and carry you home to Ithaca. He's so close. He guards it carefully for days and days, and they are just inside of the island, and he falls asleep because he has been keeping awake, trying to get back to Ithaca and his wife, the queen. And he falls asleep in exhaustion, and his men are like, what's in the bag? Why is he guarding that bag so jealously? It must be treasure. And so when he falls asleep, they slip the bag out from under him, open it up, and it releases all of the other winds, which are furious. And so instant storm emerges, and they're scattered. No longer are they going to get back to Ithaca. And the story gets worse from there. They go back to the island and ask Aeolus for a do-over, and he says, no, no, clearly the gods don't want you to return home, and I've risked angering the more important gods, and so he won't help them. And then their next stop, they wind up at an island of giants, and the giants destroy all the other ships, so only Odysseus' ship survives. All the other men on the other ships are killed by the giants. So yes, the story takes a turn for the worse when the bag of wind is opened by those who shouldn't. Interesting, it occurred to me why the giants are put in the story here. If you want to look at another story that talks about a king or learning how to be a king, not just in the sense of the guy in charge, but the guy who becomes the intermediary between the physical world and the divine forces. There's a fascinating movie called The Green Knight. And there's this bizarre scene in there where all of a sudden he's looking around and there are these giants. And one of the giants come down and is about to talk to him, speak to him, and then it flashes to another scene. And I think what's going on here is a similar type of symbology. The giants represent intelligences in the spiritual world. Odysseus is ready to have dealings with them, but his men are not. That's why he's the king. He's special. He's sort of evolved to the next level. And if his men had listened to him, they would have made it safely home, but they didn't. And sort of there's something to pay to the spiritual world for them trying to enter into this realm before they're ready. All right, and all of this, of course, goes to the point of the fool. The wisdom of God is foolishness with men. Sort of beginning this grand journey, opening this door to the spiritual world may lead to being called a fool here in the physical world, but the wisdom of God is something also real. It may not be understood, but nevertheless, it's not to be trifled with. All right, let's talk a little bit about the Uranus association. All these ancient gods had particular stories that went with them. Uranus was the embodiment of the sky or heavens, the first son of Gaia, the earth, later her husband, and gave birth to the Titans. So he was castrated by Cronus or Saturn, and his blood fell to earth and spawned giants. Another version says his genitals were thrown into the ocean and the foam spawned Aphrodite. In any event, after all of this, the sky separated from the earth and Cronus became the king. So when we say the sky separated from earth and Chronos, a very physical, here in the physical kind of energy, we lose that connection to the spiritual worlds, I think is what the symbology is suggesting. So one of the other ways we can understand these archetypes is through a device called the cube of space. This is one of the mother letters attributed to air. It comes out of the center and goes both up and down and relates to the superconscious mind, which connects the top, representing the conscious mind, with the bottom surface representing the unconscious mind, suggesting that it partakes of both qualities. One of the other places we can look to try and get insight into the meaning of a particular path is a book called the Sefer Yetzirah, or the Book of Formation. And it says this path is called the 11th path. It says the 11th path is called the scintillating or fiery intelligence. It is the essence of the veil placed before the dispositions and order of the superior and inferior causes. He who possesses this path is in the enjoyment of great dignity, for he stands face to face with a cause of causes. Giving you a minute to read the text and mull over it. Each of these phrases is deliberately cryptic. It's designed to be read and then reread and then meditated upon. And the idea is over time, the inner meaning will percolate out. But the idea here is you're tapping into something deep and spiritual and very direct. And that's why this key astrologically can result in sort of bursts of illumination, which can be paradigm shattering, so to speak. If we look at the gematria here, the Hebrew term is Sechel Matsuk Zuth. I'm sure I butchered the pronunciation of that, but I did my best. Again, the scintillating or fiery intelligence. The Hebrew adjective is from a root meaning brightness, clearness, or splendor. The letters sum up to 592, which I looked at, didn't find any meaningful associations. But sometimes we can look at the root of the word, in this case, matsok zith, sums to 242, and I found a few hits for that. Other words summing to 242, Ariel, the ruler of air, which again seems very apropos for this key, and also the Hebrew word for recollection. Recollection ties into the staff, which is said that the fool puts over his shoulder and is said to associate with memories from earlier lifetimes. So looking at Aleph, we did a number of words before. This is kind of our second run at that because there were so many attributions. Aleph is also the number of admirable, wonderful, used to describe Kether. Also Eben Cain, precious stone, a euphemism for the philosopher's stone. Ophel, darkness, obscurity. And Ola, wickedness, injustice, a step, a staircase, a burnt offering, a sacrifice, a holocaust, an ascent. So a number of competing meanings going on with that. Let's talk briefly about the symbolism in the tarot key. The white disc suggests a connection for Kether on the tree of life. Remember, this path emanates from Kether at the top of the tree. The white rose is said to be purified desire. The covering over the white undergarment is form covering spirit. So the belt implies entering into space and time. The dog suggests the intellect and how the intellect of the personality is subservient to this deeper spiritual self. The satchel is a baggage of memory, literally memories from earlier experiences of the soul's journey. And written, it's a little hard to see, but at the white lip of his undergarment is hidden the tetragrammaton, Yod He Vahi, which roughly translated is that which was, is, and will be. It's that eternal beingness aspect of ourselves. So one of the things you could do with tarot, of course, is you can do a divination. And so I thought I would cover what happens when you pull out that three-card spread in the morning or whatever particular divination method you're using with tarot. What happens when it comes up in a divination? So it can signify a number of things, originality and progressiveness, inspiration, that aha moment when you get it is associated with this key, independence, the quest for a higher truth, also breathing and breath, and sudden readjustment, or viewed less positively, chaotic changes. But also folly and eccentricity. I alluded a moment ago to its position on the tree. It connects Kether and Hokmah in the upper right-hand portion of the tree. The supernal unity with the Divine Father. It directs that limitless light of Kether into life and force. So one of the fun things that I did with the tarot keys is I went out and I looked for examples of these archetypes in film or TV. And so I had a number of hits for this card. The first, which I'm gonna crown the winner here, is the Titanic movie. So in particular, Jack's character in a Titanic, right? He's king of the world. But the role that he plays in the film is there's this interaction between Jack and Rose. So Rose, kind of the naked babe, with the jewel of eternity, or it's something different, right? The heart of the ocean, I think is what they call it. Remember, one of the associations with Olive is the precious stone. So again, Uranus is the ruler of Aquarius. She's about to kill herself, and he comes and kind of saves her. He represents the, I guess for her, it would be the animus. For a female character, the Jung would say the connection to the divine is made through the animus, and so it's a male figure for her. But he represents, as an artist in the film, that creative impulse, that creative connection that reunites her with her spiritual self. And so we kind of think of this movie as being a tragedy, but it ends with her being reunited with Jack when she passes. Remember, the exaltation of Uranus is in death. In death, her personality is reunited with Jack, that represents her deeper spiritual self, her animus, her connection to divinity. So I thought the whole thing was just beautifully done. And this movie, I don't usually go for love stories, but this is one of those, you watch it and then you watch it again, and particularly young women kept going back and back again and again and again, right? It became, for a long time, it was the best-selling, highest-grossing movie in the world, and it kept that title, I think, for the better part of a decade. And I think it's because the story is not just a love story. It's obviously a beautiful love story, but it is also hitting these archetypes and tapping on this, being able to make this spiritual connection. So I crowned that the winner. I had some runners up because there were other great entries for this. Honorable mention. So Bilbo Baggins in the Fellowship of the Ring. Bilbo was the old ring bearer, and he's heading off on an adventure after his 111th birthday with staff in hand. He throws it with some of his stuff in a bag over his shoulder, and he's off on an adventure on his 111th birthday. So I was like, well, that sure seems like a reference to the Fool, with the bag thrown over his shoulder, going off on an adventure. So, and then some of the stuff that Bilbo Baggins says when he's sort of passing the torch to Frodo, is very much in tune with this key. Right there, he is about to launch off on his adventure with his staff there. He says, "It's a dangerous business, Frodo, going out your door. You step onto the road, and if you don't keep your feet, there's no knowing where you might be swept off to." So again, very much in the archetype of the fool beginning his journey. And of course, Tolkien has some great quotes here. "Don't adventures ever have an end? I suppose not. Someone else always has to carry on the story." And again, right in keeping with the theme of this key. And then I couldn't resist another image here coming right out of science fiction, which is one of my favorite genres. So you'll note the shape of the symbol here for Uranus. So when Gene Roddenberry decided that he would create a starship for the Star Trek series, he wound up creating something that looks exactly like the shape for Uranus. And again, Uranus ties to this Fool key and the idea of launching off on a journey. And so we wind up launching a series that has gone on for the better part of, what, 50 years at this point, where you hop on a spaceship that's tied to this archetype and you boldly go where no one has gone before. So I thought that was a fascinating way to use these archetypes in film to sort of get you in the spirit of going forth and adventuring into uncharted territory. So another thing that you can use these tarot keys for is meditation, right? So how do you use this key in meditational purposes? Well, number one, to connect with your own higher self. It also promotes a sense of well-being with that connection to the higher self. It helps you remember the higher purpose and direction for which you came into in incarnation. And it can kindle a sense of adventure. If you're getting bored and you want a little adventure in your life, meditate on the Fool key and see what comes your way. See what you're inspired to go explore. And then finally, I'll leave you with this image again with the Fool key here in the middle and the colors surrounding it, inviting that Fool spirit of adventure into full manifestation in your life's journey. And with that, I'll wrap up our lecture here.